A celebration postponed for my sake became a private gala I was never meant to see. My daughter-in-law raised a glass, my heirloom sapphire glittering at her throat. One cancelled credit card wiped the smile off 10 faces and cracked open a much bigger secret. By the time the signatures came out, the trap was already shut. Who walks away with nothing? You won't guess. My name is Nora Whitcomb. I am 63 years old, and I've lived in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, long enough to know the sound of a polite lie. The phone felt cool against my ear this afternoon. You should rest. Nora, Sloane said, her voice like brushed velvet over steel. We have to postpone dinner. Evan's just buried in a work fire drill at Northline Atelier. A fire drill? I pictured my son, Evan, flapping his hands at a spreadsheet, and the image felt thin. Sloane's apologies were too bright, too practiced. The click of the phone ending the call felt definitive. Exclusion has a specific sting, sharp and familiar, and it settled deep in my chest. The house felt too large, the silence too heavy. I grabbed my coat. A dusk walk usually clears the sting. The October wind was sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves. Downtown Cedar Ridge was just coming alive for the night, the streetlights casting a brass warm glow on the brick sidewalks. The hum of conversation drifted from the patios, muffled by the chill. I pulled my scarf tighter, focusing on the rhythm of my own breathing, trying to walk off the irritation, the feeling of being managed, set aside. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just tired of being handled. I turned the corner onto Main Street, heading for the river path, when I passed the glass-fronted bistro, Lark and Lantern. And I froze. My feet simply stopped on the pavement, not in the main dining room, but in the private alcove by the fireplace, the one reserved for celebrations. There was Evan, my son, and there was Sloane, his wife. They were surrounded by 8, maybe 10, friends, their faces flushed with wine and laughter. A server was pouring champagne, the bubbles catching the light. Evan raised his glass, Sloane beside him, her head tilted back in a peal of laughter. Sloane tilted her chin, the movement full of careless grace, and something at her throat flashed blue under the low lights. It was a deep, cornflower blue, unmistakable. My breath caught. It was my mother's sapphire pendant, the one Harvey gave her for their 30th anniversary, the one she placed in my hand on her deathbed, the one I kept in the velvet box in my safe, the one Sloane had admired but I had never offered. It was sparkling at Sloane's throat. A server wheeled a second silver bucket of champagne to the table. Another round. Sloane gestured to the server, confident, laughing at something Evan said. She reached into her purse and handed the server a card. A black card. My black card. My stomach hollowed out. She had borrowed it 3 days ago. Just to buy Evan's promotion gift. Nora, she'd said, touching my arm. I want it to be perfect, and my account is just tied up. I'd hesitated, then handed it over. My hands were trembling, but not from the cold. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers stiff. I pulled up my banking app. The screen glowed, mocking me. And there, at the top of the pending charges, a transaction rolling in live, Lark and Lantern, an obscene charge, enough to feed a family for a month. My thumb moved before my brain caught up. I navigated to the card management page. I saw the option, Freeze Card. I pressed it. Hard. The screen confirmed card cancelled. I looked back up, through the glass. The celebration had paused. The server had returned to their table, this time with a manager, a small, anxious-looking man in a suit. He was leaning in, speaking quietly to Sloane. Her smile was gone. She looked irritated, dismissive. She waved her hand, then looked toward the register, annoyed. And her eyes scanned the street. They moved past me, then snapped back. Our eyes met. Across the glass. Across the 10 feet of cold sidewalk. I saw the moment she recognized me standing in the dark. I saw the flicker of surprise. But there was no shame, no apology. Her expression hardened, the annoyance melting into pure, undiluted contempt. She held my gaze, challenging me. I didn't move. I just watched her. The woman wearing my mother's jewels, bought with my money. At a party she lied to exclude me from. After a long, frozen moment, I turned away. The walk home was cold and wordless, but the sting of exclusion was gone. It had been replaced by something harder, something colder, something that felt like stone solidifying in my veins. The front door closed with a quiet click, but the silence in the entryway was louder than the imagined laughter from the bistro. I walked into my kitchen, the one Harvey and I designed, and stood by the sink, looking out into the dark yard. My life, since Harvey died, has been a creature of routine. A 39-year marriage doesn't just end, it shatters, and you rebuild a new life from the sharpest pieces. My pieces were small comforts. Coffee on the porch at dawn, inhaling the sharp, clean scent of the rosemary bushes Harvey planted. The 6 crossword puzzle, the black ink filling the white squares. A small, solvable problem. This routine was the armor I wore against the grief. 4 years ago, Evan brought Sloane into that routine. She arrived like a bright, sharp object, all savvy angles and stylish, neutral-toned clothing. She was a brand strategist, she'd said, a title that seemed to mean she was impressively, perpetually between jobs. The red flags were there from the beginning, tiny crimson pinpricks I chose to ignore. She had an appetite for the luxe, her eyes scanning my comfortable, lived-in home with an almost anthropological curiosity. I'll never forget the time she patted my favorite armchair and joked about my cute thrift store chic. Evan had given a tight, awkward laugh. I hadn't. Then came the wedding vision. It started small and then spiraled, bloating with Sloane's ambitions. Imported flowers, a string quartet, a specific shade of dove grey that required custom-dyed linens. Coincidentally, her temporary pause in job hunting became permanent just as the major deposits were due. "We'll pay you back every cent." "Mum." "Of course," Evan had assured me, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I funded most of it. I told myself it was his wedding, too. After the wedding came the condo investment, a sleek, glass-walled box downtown. "It's a perfect starter investment for us." "Nora," Sloane had explained, her hand on my arm. "But just for tax timing, it makes so much more sense for the deed to be in your name for the first year or two." My name went on the deed. My savings covered the down payment. They moved in, rent-free, to get on their feet. The feet never seemed to touch the ground. From then on, it was a steady drip of emergencies, tire blowouts on her high-end SUV, an urgent, cosmetic need for dental veneers, a constant stream of networking dinners that cost more than my monthly utilities. All of it, somehow, migrating onto my credit card, the one she'd borrowed to buy my own son a gift. The more I paid, The further away they drifted. Evan's calls, once daily, shortened to weekly, then to clipped, perfunctory check-ins. Work is crazy. Mum, gotta run. Sloane erected schedule walls I couldn't penetrate. I was being managed, handled, kept at a polite distance while my accounts were drawn down, and I let it happen. I rationalized every single charge. It keeps him close, I told myself, staring at the ceiling in the dark. If I paid for their dinners, if I solved their emergencies, Evan would still need me. He would still call. Harvey would help. I'd whisper to the empty space beside me in bed. He was a generous man. He would have wanted his son to be happy, to have a good start. It's family. This was the biggest lie, the one that covered all the others. Tonight, standing on that cold sidewalk, that lie shattered. The humiliation was a clarifying fire. Seeing Sloane's face, the flash of contempt as she held my gaze, it reframed everything. My generosity wasn't kindness, it was a transaction. I was buying proximity to my own son. Harvey's generosity came from strength. Mine came from fear. This wasn't love. It was cowardice, masked as love. And as I stood there in the dark, I knew, with a sickening certainty, that they had known it all along. I didn't sleep. The cold resolve that settled in my veins on the walk home had sharpened into a bright, hard clarity. At 4 a, I went to the kitchen, but not for coffee. I pulled out my laptop, my file box of important papers, a yellow legal pad, and a black highlighter. The kitchen table, bathed in the harsh glow of the under-cabinet lights, became my war room. The humiliation was gone, replaced by a cold, methodical need for facts. I started with the bank statements, logging into my account. I went back 6 months, then a year, then 2. It was all there, a narrative of quiet theft written in black and red. I wasn't just scrolling. I was cataloguing. Sloane's world, built with my name. There were the boutique charges, names I didn't recognize but whose websites screamed luxury. Med spa packages for treatments I'd never heard of. Dues for a golf club I'd never visited. Tickets to a charity gala that cost 4 figures, a gala I was never invited to. With each click, the highlighter drew a thick, angry line across the paper. I cross-referenced the statements with my email archive. Tucked into a promotions folder was an invoice from a high-end travel agency, Cabo Platinum Retreat. 2 guests. Ocean Suite. The charge date was 2 weeks ago. The travel date was next month. My blood ran cold. I moved from the bank to my insurance portal. I pulled up the rider on my homeowner's policy, the one that listed my valuable items, my mother's sapphire set, Harvey's watch, my grandmother's diamond earrings. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering a slow, heavy beat. The serial numbers for the sapphire pendant and the matching earrings had been newly removed from the coverage. Removed. Not by me. The update was dated 6 weeks ago. This wasn't impulsive. It was premeditated. My mind raced. How did she get the serial numbers? How did she access my policy? My gaze landed on an old iPad sitting on the counter, the one Evan had set up for me years ago. Just so we can share calendars and photos. Mum? It was still synced. My fingers felt numb as I opened the messages. His were there, but so were hers. Her iCloud account was linked. And there, in a group chat named Brides Plus Babes, was everything. I scrolled, my breath catching in my throat. I saw screenshots of my jewelry. I saw a message from Sloane, sent months ago, heirloom pieces, wasted in a drawer. Consider it rehoming. The laughter reacts from her friends piled up beneath it. My hand was shaking now. I kept scrolling. And then, the photo. It was Sloane, standing in front of what looked like my guest room mirror, the one with the good lighting. She was wearing the entire sapphire set, the pendant, the earrings, the bracelet. Her chin was tilted in that same arrogant way I'd seen through the bistro window. Beneath it, her caption, posted just hours ago, tonight's look. The old lady won't notice. The old lady. I didn't stop. I went deeper, into her direct messages. I found a thread with a name I didn't recognize, a grey market consignment broker. The conversation was chillingly professional. Appointments were labelled Client SW. They were discussing valuations, consignment fees, and timelines for a high-value sapphire set. I printed everything. The bank statements, highlighted and annotated, the Cabo invoice, the insurance rider update, every single screenshot from the bride's-babes chat, the mirror selfie, the entire conversation with the consignment broker. I dated each page with a steady hand. Finally, I walked to the study. I spun the dial on my safe, the familiar clicks echoing in the silent house. I swung the heavy door open. The velvet box was right where I always kept it. I lifted the lid. It was empty. The pressed velvet impression of the pendant and earrings was all that remained. I placed the stack of printed evidence inside the safe, next to the empty box. I closed the door, spun the dial, and listened as the tumblers fell into place, locking the truth safely inside. I was on my second cup of coffee, the yellow legal pad sitting in the center of the kitchen table, when his car door slammed. I didn't need to look out the window. The impatient stomp on the porch, the way the doorbell was pressed twice. Hard, it was Evan. He pushed past me the second I unlocked the deadbolt, his face mottled and red. He was radiating indignation. "Mum, what the hell was that?" His voice was high, cracking with a self-righteous anger I knew wasn't his. It was a poor imitation of Sloane's. "You made a scene. You embarrassed Sloane. You embarrassed me. Cancelling a credit card. In the middle of dinner. What were you thinking?" I didn't answer. I just walked back to my chair at the kitchen table and sat down. I looked at the empty chair opposite me, the one where Harvey used to sit. "Sit down." "Evan." "I don't want to sit down." He paced the length of the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. "It was supposed to be a surprise. Mum, that's why we told you dinner was postponed. We were going to celebrate with friends and then come get you, bring you back for a private dessert. You just ruined it. You were so dramatic." The lie was flimsy, transparent. It was the kind of lie you tell a child, expecting them to believe it simply because you said it. "A surprise," I said, my voice flat. "Is that why Sloane was wearing my mother's sapphire pendant? Was that part of the surprise, too?" He waved his hand, a dismissive gesture he'd definitely picked up from her. "She borrowed it. She was going to ask. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. It's just jewelry." "Sit down." He huffed, scraping the chair legs against the floor as he finally sat. His eyes refused to meet mine. I turned the legal pad around so it faced him. "I was up all night. This is what you two have spent on my card in the last 12 months. He glanced at the columns, the neat figures, the final, horrifying total circled at the bottom. He squinted, These are just normal household expenses. Mum, we've been balancing things. This is what it costs to live. Normal. I tapped the highlighter on a specific line. $4,000 at a med spa. Is that a household expense dues for a golf club I've never heard of? 3 networking dinners a week, each costing over $500. Sloane needs that, he snapped, his defensiveness flaring bright. She's under a lot of pressure. She's building a brand. She needs this downtime for her mental health. You don't understand the world she's in. I understand the world I'm in, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I'm in a world where my son thinks I'm a bank. And what about this? I slid the Cabo invoice across the table. This platinum retreat for 2. He paled, but the recovery was quick, practiced. That was a bank error. Sloane already called them this morning. It's being reversed. A bank error. The exact words I'd seen in the text message she sent him at 11:03 last night. Tell her it was a bank error. She'll buy it. My own son. Sitting across from me, reading a script his wife had written for him. The grief of it was a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs. He saw the look on my face and mistook it for surrender. He stood up, leaning his palms on the table. You know what your problem is, Mum? You've lived your life. You and Dad had your time. You had everything. Why can't you just let us live ours? Why do you have to be so controlling? There it was. The wound. You've lived your life. The implication clear mine was over, and my only remaining purpose was to fund theirs. I stood up slowly, matching his posture. The trembling in my hands had stopped. The sorrow was gone, burned away by the cold clarity of his words. I'm closing the bank. Evan? What does that mean? Are you threatening me? It means the joint accounts will be closed by noon today. The card you tried to use last night is already dead. All automatic payments linked to my name are being shut down. The bank, I said, meeting his gaze, is closed. You can't do that, he shouted, his voice cracking. We have bills due. The lease. You both have jobs. Or at least, you do. You'll have to figure it out. We stared at each other in a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. And in that vacuum, a sharp, no-nonsense knock echoed from the front door. The tension broke. I walked out of the kitchen to see my neighbour, Pearl Jennings, standing on the porch, a covered casserole dish in her hands. Pearl is 70, wears practical sneakers, and misses nothing that happens on our street. She looked past my shoulder, saw Evan's flushed, angry face, saw the legal pad on the table behind him. Her sharp blue eyes took in the entire tableau in less than a second. Nora, she said, her voice crisp and clear. I brought you the final numbers for the church bake sale. She looked directly at Evan, her expression unreadable. You look like you were just leaving, young man. It was a statement, not a question. Evan sputtered, looking from me to this immovable pillar of the community. He grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door. This isn't over. Mum! He seethed and pushed past Pearl without a word of apology. I watched him get into his luxury SUV, the one I'd paid the down payment for, and speed away. Pearl stepped inside, setting the dish on the entryway table. He'll be back, she said. As soon as he needs something else. He already needs something, I whispered, the adrenaline finally leaving me, my knees feeling weak. Pearl put a firm, surprisingly strong hand on my arm. Listen to me, Nora. My youngest son, Robert. He convinced me to co-sign on a small business loan 6 years ago, used my deed as leverage without me knowing. It took me 2 years and nearly my entire retirement fund to clean up the mess. I stared at her. Pearl. I had no idea. Nobody does, she said, shaking her head. We don't do shame here. Nora, we do paperwork. She nodded back toward my kitchen. That pad of paper is a good start, but you're dealing with vipers. You need a professional. My niece, Tessa Mora, she's an attorney. She's the one who fixed my disaster. She eats people like your daughter-in-law for lunch. Pearl reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a simple, cream-colored business card. She pressed it into my hand. You're not being dramatic, Nora. You're being robbed. Call her. Today. I called the number on the card before my nerve could break. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. Tessa Mora. 2 hours later, I was sitting in her quiet, organized office. It was all pale wood, glass, and a single, striking, abstract painting. There was not one single personal photograph. Tessa Mora was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe knot and eyes that didn't just look at you. They assessed. She was precision personified. I had brought my safe box. I didn't tell her the whole story, not the emotional part. I just laid the documents on her polished desk, the highlighted bank statements, the Cabo invoice, the insurance rider, the printed screenshots from the bride's babes chat, and the DMs with the consignment broker. She didn't read them at first. She just sorted them into neat piles. Let's inventory your assets. Nora, she said, her voice as cool as the glass on her desk. She opened a fresh legal pad. Your primary residence? The house in Cedar Ridge. It's mine. Free and clear. Harvey and I paid it off a decade ago. Good, she said, making a note. The condo Evan and Sloane live in. The deed is in my name, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It was for tax timing. Tessa's pen paused. She looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than professional assessment. It might have been surprise. The deed is solely in your name. Yes. That is not a small thing. Nora, that is leverage. Significant leverage. She continued. The jewelry. Documented. I have the original appraisals and serial numbers. And I pushed the mirror selfie across the desk. I have proof of possession by Sloane. Time-stamped. And the card misuse. Documented, I said, tapping the bank statements. She spent the next 10 minutes in complete silence, reading. She absorbed every text, every invoice. When she was done, she aligned the papers into a single, perfect stack. All right, she said. Here is the legal roadmap. First, we pursue a civil recovery for all unauthorized charges. We can quantify this. It's a clear debt. Second, there is a potential criminal referral for theft, wire fraud, and insurance fraud. We will hold that in reserve. It's a card we don't play until we have to. She leaned forward. But first, we lock you down. Immediately. Do they have any financial power of attorney for you? Evan does. For medical, I think. And we revoke it. Today, we revoke all of them. We freeze every line of credit in your name. We pull your full credit report to see what else is out there that you don't know about. And we add fraud alerts to everything. From this moment, your financial world is a vault. I must have looked overwhelmed. because her voice softened, just a fraction. This is the necessary part, Nora, the hard stop. Then she said, "We also need to draft a new will." My breath hitched. "A new will." "Your current will," she stated, not asked, "leaves everything to Evan." "Yes." "That must change. We need diversified beneficiaries. You are of sound mind and clear purpose. We will document that. We can leave Evan a portion if you wish, but it must be structured. We will add clear life estate language for your home, protecting you. And I suggest we add a charitable slice, something meaningful to you. The Silver Harbor Foundation. Perhaps it creates a new, clear record of your intentions." I thought of Harvey. I thought of the son I had raised. And I thought of the woman wearing my mother's jewels. "Yes," I said. "We do that." "Good." Tessa closed the file. "My Aunt Pearl was right. You have a steady spine." She steepled her fingers. "My maxim in these cases is simple. We won't torch anything. We're not seeking revenge. We're seeking truth. We'll just thaw the fog. And when the fog clears, we'll let the truth show. People like Sloane, they cannot operate in the clear light of day." She then laid out the plan. It was cold. It was methodical. It was brilliant. "Phase 1, she said, "is the bait. You are going to apologize to them." I recoiled. "Apologize? You're going to tell them you overreacted, that you're having sleep issues, that you were confused. And to make amends, you are going to reopen the bank. You will gift Sloane a new, shiny decoy card, a no-limit card, just for her. In reality, it will be a prepaid card with a $500 cap, and every single attempted transaction will send an instant alert to my phone and yours. We need to document her active, present-day intent. She'll give it to us." "Phase 2, Tessa continued, "is the trap. Next week, you will invite them to a family legacy dinner. You'll tell them you've been meeting with your attorney to set up your living inheritance, and you want them there for the formal signing. Witnesses will be present. Pearl, perhaps another neighbor?" She smiled. A thin, cold smile. "Sloane's greed will seat her at that table. I guarantee it." "And phase 3. "Phase 3, Tessa said, her eyes fixed on mine, "is when we unveil the chain of custody for the stolen heirlooms, mid-signing. Not before. We don't give them time to build a defense. We thaw the fog right there in your dining room, with witnesses. And then, Nora, we let the truth do its work. It took 3 days to arrange the tea. I called Evan, my voice pitched to sound contrite and tired. He agreed to come, his own voice wary. I baked a lemon and thyme bread. The house smelled of herbs and butter, a carefully constructed aroma of domestic peace. When they arrived, Evan looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. Sloane was immaculate, dressed in a cream-coloured cashmere wrap, her expression neutral, assessing. I poured the tea into Harvey's mother's china cups. My hands were perfectly steady. "Evan, Sloane, thank you for coming," I began, my voice just a little weaker than usual. I owe you both an apology." Evan looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. Sloane's gaze sharpened. "I haven't been sleeping," I said, pressing my fingers to my temple. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. "I've been on edge. When I saw you at the restaurant, I just wasn't thinking clearly. I overreacted." "Evan, you were right. It was dramatic. And I'm deeply sorry for the scene I caused. I was confused. The words tasted like ash, but I kept a small, remorseful smile fixed on my face. Evan's shoulders, which had been tensed up to his ears, visibly dropped. The relief washed over his face, making him look young again. "It's okay. Mum? Really? We were just worried about you. We knew you weren't yourself." "Well, I want to make amends," I said, reaching for my handbag. I know I was abrupt, closing things down. It was childish. I've been speaking with the bank, and I've opened a new account, just to make things easier again. I pulled out the sleek, platinum-colored card Tessa had given me. It looked expensive. "Sloane?" I said, holding it out to her. "I wanted you to have this, to make up for the embarrassment at the restaurant. Please. There's no limit. Just use it for whatever you need to get back on track. For the household." Her eyes flicked to the card, a tiny, sharp movement of pure, unadulterated hunger. It was the only break in her smooth facade. Then she composed herself, her expression softening into one of gracious magnanimity. "Nora, that's incredibly generous," she murmured, taking it from my hand. Her fingers were cool. "Thank you. Apology accepted, of course. We just want you to be happy." She pocketed it. Evan let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a problem being solved. He smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. Mom was back. The bank was open. They left soon after, promising to call later in the week, the moment their car was out of the driveway. I picked up my phone. It took less than 48 hours. I was pruning Harvey's rosemary bushes when the first push notification pinged. My phone and Tessa's were both tied to the account. Notification transaction declined. Card ending 581. Merchant La Fay Couture. Amount $6,420. I snipped a dead branch. An hour later, I was dusting the living room. Ping. Notification transaction declined. Card ending 5081. Merchant Salt House Spa. Amount $2,150. She was trying to buy her entire world back in one afternoon, on a card with a $500 prepaid limit. Ping. Notification transaction. Declined. Card ending 5081. Merchant Vintners Row. Amount $1,900. Then, silence for half a day. A new alert came in just as I was sitting down for dinner. Notification transaction approved. Card ending 5081. Merchant Bayside Jewelry and Appraisal. Amount $50. My blood went cold. $50. A small holding charge to test the card, to see what the actual limit was. And a jewelry boutique? Not a consignment broker, but an appraiser. I forwarded the alert to Tessa. Her call came 10 minutes later. "I know the owner at Bayside, Nora," she said, her voice crisp. "All business." I just made a call. A Mrs. Mercer did indeed make a $50 purchase, an antique pin. She used it as a pretext to schedule an appointment for tomorrow. She's bringing in some old family pieces for evaluation. She specifically mentioned a sapphire set. She was shopping for a better offer, using my apology card to do it. "Tessa," I said, "it's time for phase 2. I called Evan that night. My voice was warm, energized. "Evan, darling, I'm so glad we cleared the air. I've been doing so much thinking, and I had a wonderful, long meeting with my attorney." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the line, sharp enough to be Sloane, listening on speaker. "I've decided it's time to set up my living inheritance documents. I said, letting the words hang in the air, sweet and heavy. It's time to start passing things on, properly. I want you and Sloane to come to dinner next Tuesday night. We'll have a few witnesses. Just Pearl and the Levins from next door. Tessa will be here as well, just to oversee the signing and make sure it's all legal. I paused, then added, It's a legacy dinner, really, to protect your future, both of yours. The silence on the other end was electric, thick with unspoken calculations. I could practically hear Sloane preening, her mind alight with the word inheritance. Evan's voice, when it finally came, was thick with a new, profound hope. Wow, Mum, that's amazing. Really, so generous. We'll be there. Absolutely. Thank you. When I hung up, I walked into the dining room. On Tuesday, I cooked a simple roast chicken. I set the table with the good china and the silver. I placed 6 settings. In the very center of the table, where a centerpiece of flowers might have gone, I laid a neatly folded linen napkin, and underneath it, I centered the dark, empty velvet box. The roast chicken sat untouched. The aroma of rosemary and thyme, which had seemed so welcoming an hour ago, now felt heavy, almost suffocating. Pearl arrived first, her expression sober. Mr. and Mrs. Levin from next door, a quiet couple in their late 70s, followed, looking slightly bewildered but resolute. They were here as witnesses, as requested. Tessa arrived last, carrying a slim leather briefcase. She sat at the head of the table opposite me and, with a quiet nod, placed a slim digital recorder on the table, pressing a small button. It glowed with a tiny, steady red light. Evan and Sloane were the last to be seated. Evan looked hopeful, almost buoyant. Sloane was radiant, practically vibrating with anticipation. She had worn her important dress, a silk sheath in a shade of forest green, her hair perfect. She looked like a woman about to inherit the world. I let the silence settle for a moment, the only sound the quiet tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and measured in the quiet room. I told Evan and Sloane this was a legacy dinner, and it is. But before we can sign any documents transferring a legacy, I paused, my eyes moving from Evan to Sloane. We must first verify what is actually mine to give. Sloane's smile tightened, just a fraction. Evan's brow furrowed in confusion. Tessa, without a word, opened her briefcase and placed a thick 1-inch black binder on the table. "Binder 1, she said, is a financial accounting." She opened it to the first tab, a summary sheet. "We have 6 months of flagged bank and credit card statements here. Nora, all tied to accounts you funded, and all charges originating from your daughter-in-law. Sloane." She turned the binder so the Levins and Pearl could see the neatly highlighted columns. "The unauthorized total for this period comes to $47,854. A collective, quiet breath was sucked out of the room. Mr. Levin adjusted his glasses. Pearl just stared, her face grim. Evan looked stunned. 47,000. That can't be right. Sloane? What is this?" Sloane tossed her hair back. "That's absurd. Those are household expenses, blended accounts. This is just a misunderstanding. It's totally out of context." "Is it?" Tessa asked, her voice calm. She flipped to the next section and produced a second, thinner binder. "Binder 2 is context." She opened it. The first page was a screenshot of the bride's Babe's group chat. Sloane's message. Heirloom pieces. Wasted in a drawer. Consider it rehoming was highlighted in yellow. Sloane's face went white. That is a private conversation. It's a joke, girl talk. You have no right. Tessa turned the page. It was the mirror selfie. Sloane, wearing my sapphires. The caption, tonight's look. The old lady won't notice. The old lady? I repeated, my voice quiet, but carrying in the dead silence. This is... Sloane was sputtering. This is entrapment. You're twisting things. Am I? Tessa said, tapping the date on the screenshot. This was posted at 6:15 p.m. on October 21st. An hour later. She tapped the bank statement from Binder 1. The first charge for the celebration at Lark and Lantern appeared on Nora's card. The timing seems very much in context. That's enough, Evan said, his voice rising. Mum, what is this? This is an ambush. This, I said, is what you call letting you live. I reached for the folded linen napkin in the center of the table. I lifted it slowly. The empty, crushed velvet box sat there under the dining room light. Sloane's gasp was sharp. Evan just stared, his face ashen. You said she borrowed it. Evan, I said. But the box was here. Empty. She didn't borrow it from me. She stole it from my safe. I slid a high-resolution 8x10 photo across the table. It was the one I'd taken from the sidewalk, through the bistro glass. Sloane, chin tilted, laughing. My mother's sapphire glittering at her throat. You lied to me, I said, looking directly at my son. You lied to my face. I didn't, he stammered. Perhaps you were just following a script, Tessa interjected, sliding another, smaller printout onto the table. It was the text thread. Evan Mom asked about Cabo. Sloane say bank glitch. She'll buy it. Evan flinched as if he'd been slapped. He looked at the paper, then at Sloane, the realization dawning, the pieces of his own manipulation laid bare. He faltered, his mouth opening and closing with no sound. Sloane saw him waver, and she doubled down. Her chair scraped back as she stood, her eyes flashing. This is pathetic. You're a controlling, bitter old woman. You've always hated me because Evan chose me over you. You're trying to poison him against me with this theatre. She looked at Pearl and the Levins. That jewellery she gave it to me. She said it was for the next Mrs. Whitcomb. It was a verbal gift. There's no proof it wasn't. The room was electric with her fury. Tessa Mora did not raise her voice. She simply reached into her briefcase one last time and slid a set of notarized documents across the polished wood, stopping them directly in front of Sloane. That is a notarized copy of Nora's insurance policy, dated 2 months ago, listing the sapphires with photographs and serial numbers as her sole property. Tessa said calmly, "That is the original appraisal from 1985, and that is a sworn affidavit from Nora stating no gift letter, email, text, or verbal offer was ever made. Your claim, Sloane, is legally baseless. The insurance photos and their timestamps directly contradict your timeline." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. All the anger, all the performance had drained away, leaving a stark, cold silence. Sloane stood rigid, her face a mask of fury. Evan was still seated, his gaze fixed on the text message printout. He looked broken. I didn't look at Sloane. I didn't look at Tessa or Pearl. I looked at my son. I raised you to be kind. Evan, I said, my voice not rising, not breaking, just stating a fact. I raised you to have a good heart. I did not raise you to be spineless. His head snapped up. The word hit him harder than a shout. His face crumpled. It wasn't the staged, self-righteous anger from the other day. This was real. This was the collapse of a man who had seen, finally, the cage he had helped build around himself. Mom, he started, and his voice broke. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I just wanted her to be happy, he whispered, the admission torn from him. I didn't want to fight anymore. I knew it was wrong. I knew it. But I chose her approval. I chose it over the truth. I see that, I said. Sloane let out a sound of pure disgust. It was a sneer that twisted her beautiful features. Oh, stop it. Both of you. This is pathetic. She grabbed her purse from the back of the chair. Keep your drafty old house, Nora. Keep your dusty memories. We'll be fine without you. We'll be better. She made for the door. Sloane. Tessa's voice cut through the air, stopping her cold. It was still calm, still measured. You may want to stay for this part. Sloane turned, her hand on the dining room doorway. What you've seen so far is just the inventory, Tessa said, as if discussing the weather. This is the consequence. A civil complaint has been drafted. It's for the full $47,854, plus recovery costs and damages. It's ready to be filed. Sloane laughed, a high, brittle sound. You can't prove any of that was unauthorized. It's my word against hers. Not quite, Tessa said. She pulled another document from her briefcase. We also have a criminal referral prepared, outlining the theft, the wire fraud, and the insurance fraud. And that, she added, is supported by this. She slid a new paper onto the table. This is a sworn statement from the consignment broker you've been contacting. He has already provided receipts and a full record of your communications. Tessa then turned over a final, single sheet of paper. It was a printout of an email, though the names and identifying details had been blurred with a black marker. This is the broker's confirmation email to a private buyer, Tessa said. It details the pending sale of the sapphire set. The sale is scheduled for this Saturday. Your verbal gift was about to be liquidated. Sloane's face was no longer angry. It was, for the first time, afraid. Pearl Jennings, who had been silent through the entire exchange, leaned forward, her eyes like flint. She looked at Evan, who was still slumped in his chair. A mother's love isn't a debit card. Evan, she said, her voice sharp. You can't just keep swiping it and expect the balance to never come due. You need to pick a side. Evan lifted his head. He looked at the wreckage on the table, the bank statements, the texts, the mirror selfie of his wife wearing my mother's jewels, the email confirming their sale. His gaze settled on the high-resolution photo of Sloane at the bistro, laughing, the pendant at her throat. His voice was small, cracked, almost unrecognizable. Sloane, he said. Just bring the jewelry back, please. Give it back to her. Sloane stared at him, her expression hardening from fear back into contempt. She looked at him as if he were a bug. No, she said, her voice flat. It's already spoken for. A collective breath iced the room. It was the final admission. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a transaction. She had sold my past for her future. Evan just stared at her, the last flicker of hope dying in his eyes. I stood up and slowly closed Binder 1. Then I closed Binder 2. The quiet thud of the covers sounded like a gavel. "Then we're done talking," I said. Sloane didn't just leave. She detonated. The door slammed, rattling the china in the cabinet. Pearl and the Levins left soon after, their faces grim, offering quiet, firm squeezes of my hand. Tessa did not pack her briefcase. The moment the door closed on our witnesses, she was on her phone. "The sale is Saturday. Nora," she'd said, her voice dropping into a low, urgent gear. "We don't have the luxury of waiting until morning. By 10, The next day, Tessa was in a judge's chambers, filing an emergency ex parte motion. By 10:30, she had a signed temporary restraining order, barring the transfer, sale, or movement of the identified pieces. By 11:15, the civil unit of the sheriff's department was walking into the Bayside Jewelry and Appraisal Boutique. The owner, faced with a TRO bearing a judge's signature and 2 uniformed deputies, did not put up a fight. He was a legitimate businessman, spooked and visibly angry at being involved. He surrendered the entire sapphire set, the pendant, the earrings, the bracelet, along with copies of his emails with client SW. And then he handed over one more thing. "She gave me this yesterday," he told the deputies, eager to cooperate. "To prove it was all above board, said it was a family gift." Tessa called me from her car. "He had the set, Nora, we have it. But he also had something else. It was a single-page document, a gift affidavit. It stated, in clumsy legal language, that I, Nora Whitcomb, had gifted the complete sapphire set to my daughter-in-law, Sloane Mercer, out of love and affection. And at the bottom, just above a notary stamp from a check-cashing place, was a signature, a shaky, laboured, almost childish imitation of my name. Tessa, who had prearranged everything, faxed the affidavit to a forensic handwriting expert she kept on retainer. The 1-page opinion letter came back by 3 p. It was definitive. The signature was not Nora Whitcomb's. It was a clear, demonstrable forgery. Tessa summoned Evan to her office that afternoon. Not my house. Her territory. He arrived looking grey and hollowed out, probably expecting to negotiate the terms of the bank fraud. He was still in the wreckage of the night before. Tessa didn't offer him coffee. She let him sit for a moment in the silence. Then she slid the affidavit and the expert's 1-page letter across the polished desk. "That's the financial complaint. Evan," she said. "But this is the forgery." He picked it up. I wasn't there. But Tessa described it to me later. He read the affidavit. He saw the signature. He read the expert's damning conclusion. His face didn't just fall, it altered. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding or blended expenses. This was a calculated criminal act. He was looking at a document designed to prove his own mother was a liar in a court of law. He finally, completely, saw the calculus Sloane had been running. Sloane arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by a terse text from Evan. She must have sensed the shift in gravity, because she entered not with fury, but with a defensive, brittle energy. "What is this now?" she demanded. Evan just pushed the affidavit toward her. She saw it, and for the first time, she sprinted to a public relations spin. "Oh, that's not a forgery. My God, Nora is so dramatic." She attempted a laugh. "She gave me permission to sign her name." ages ago. For condo papers, bank forms. It was a pre-signed permission. I must have just used the wrong form. Tessa, who had been watching, silent, leaned forward. "Then can you explain," she asked, her voice quiet, "why this document is dated and notarized on the evening of October 21st? The same night you wore the jewelry to Lark and Lantern. The same night you were caught by Nora. How did you get her permission for that specific date and document?" "Sloane, when she was at home, and you were at a party, lying to her." Sloane had no answer. I came to Tessa's office an hour later. On the conference table, laid out on a soft cloth, was my mother's jewelry. My hands were trembling as I reached out and lifted the pendant. It was cold and heavy. I turned my back to them all and fastened the clasp around my throat. My fingers fumbled, but I got it done. When I turned back, my hands were clasped in front of me. My voice was steady. "Now," I said, "we discuss the terms." Tessa laid them out. They were not a negotiation. They were a surrender. First, a legally binding repayment schedule for the full $47,854. Second, they had 21 days to vacate my condo. Third, they would both sign a consent to civil judgment, which would be filed immediately and held by Tessa. If they missed a single payment, or if the condo was not left in perfect condition, she would file it with the court, destroying their credit for a decade. Evan sat motionless, staring at the affidavit. Sloane was vibrating with a silent, trapped rage. "Mom," Evan finally whispered, looking up at me. His eyes were hollow. "Can we just have one night? Just one night. To talk about this? To figure it out?" I looked at my son, the man he was, the man he had allowed himself to become. "Evan," I said, the pendant heavy and cold against my skin. "You don't need a night to figure out integrity. You can have integrity in 1 minute." The formal sign-off was scheduled for the following Monday in Tessa's conference room. Pearl and Mr. Levin were there as witnesses, seated quietly against the wall. Evan arrived alone, looking grey and hollowed out. He sat at the far end of the long, polished table, staring at the wood grain. Sloane arrived 5 minutes late, and she was not alone. She swept in with a lawyer I did not recognize, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit, and Sloane was smirking. It was a tight, confident, contemptuous smirk. She had clearly fed her counsel her own version of the story, one in which she was the aggrieved party, the victim of a controlling, hysterical mother-in-law. Tessa didn't acknowledge the smirk. She gave a professional nod to the new lawyer. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. She began, just as she had in my dining room, but this time it was not a presentation. It was an execution. She placed the binders on the table. "For the benefit of new counsel," she said, "we have the executed temporary restraining order. We have the broker's signed receipts for the recovered jewelry. We have the forensic handwriting expert's formal letter on the forgery. And we have the complete packet of the group chat logs." Sloane's lawyer, who had been sitting with a confident posture, stopped taking notes. His pen hovered. He looked at the cover of the handwriting expert's report, then at the mirror selfie on top of the chat log packet. His eyes narrowed. He leaned towards Sloane, whispering furiously. She hissed something back, her face flushing. He stood up abruptly. "A word in the hallway. Now." He wasn't looking at Tessa. He was looking at his own client. They were gone for perhaps 10 minutes. We sat in the heavy silence. Evan never looked up. When they returned, the lawyer's face was grim. The smirk was gone from Sloane's. "My client," the lawyer began, his voice stiff, "is prepared to discuss the condo situation, but she firmly refutes all financial claims and contests the ownership of the jewellery." Tessa held up a single hand. "Before you continue, Counselor, I believe you are missing one final piece of discovery. You've only seen her version. Now you can hear it." Tessa clicked the mouse on her laptop. A small speaker on the conference table hissed to life. Sloane's voice filled the room. It was bright, conspiratorial, and dripping with contempt. "Just move the sale along quickly," the recording said. "The old woman won't fight. She's fragile. She's so desperate for her son. She'll roll over on anything. Just get it done." Tessa stopped the recording. "A voicemail," she said calmly. "Left for the consignment broker. Time stamped at 9:04 the morning after the gala at Lark and Lantern. The morning after Nora caught you wearing the jewels. The morning she called you out." Sloane's lawyer sank slowly into his chair. He looked at his client with a kind of weary disgust. Evan, however, looked up. His face was pale, but his eyes were, for the first time, completely clear. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and picked up the pen from the center of the table. "Where do I sign?" Tessa slid the settlement agreement in front of him. He signed every page without reading. The repayment agreement, which stipulated an initial lump sum from the immediate, forced sale of his luxury SUV, the mandatory therapy clause, the strict no-contact clause between Sloane and myself, the agreement to vacate my condo in 21 days. Tessa slid an identical copy to Sloane. "And you." Sloane crossed her arms. "I'm not signing anything. This is a shakedown. I'm not implicated in his debt." Tessa nodded, as if she had expected this. She picked up a different, thicker document from her briefcase. "Very well. In that case, I will be filing this criminal referral with the district attorney's office by 5 p. today. It includes the theft, the wire fraud, and, of course, the attempted forgery, which carries a significant penalty." Sloane's lawyer shot up. "Sloane, do not say another word." He looked at Tessa, all pretense gone. "We will advise our client to accept the settlement talks, or perhaps just exit." Evan, who had been standing silently, looked at Sloane. His face was empty. He slowly, deliberately, pulled his wedding ring from his finger. He placed it on the polished table, right next to her unsigned copy of the agreement. "I will not be part of this," he said. His voice was flat. "I'm done." Sloane stared at the ring, then at Evan, then at me. The hatred that poured off her was so pure it was almost visible. "Fine," she spat, her voice venomous. "Enjoy your thrift store life. Both of you." She grabbed her purse, shoved her own lawyer out of the way, and stormed out of the conference room. The heavy door shut, clicking quietly into the heavy silence. Tessa looked at Pearl and Mr. Levin. "If you would now." They stepped forward and signed their names as witnesses on Evan's agreement, and on the new last will and testament I had brought. Pearl squeezed my hand, her grip firm. "Dignity looks good on you, Nora," she whispered. I didn't stay. I left Evan to finalize the details of the SUV sale with Tessa's paralegal. I drove home. The house was quiet. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the living room windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I was still wearing the pendant. It felt warm against my skin, no longer heavy, just mine. I walked to the study. I opened the safe. I placed the velvet box, now holding the full set, back inside. I closed the heavy door and spun the lock. I placed my new, signed will and the countersigned civil agreement on the desk beside it. The knot was finally untied, not by anger, but by proof, by paper, and by a spine that had finally refused to bend any further. My phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up. A simple text from Evan. "Thank you, Mom." Before I replied to him, I sent a new text to Tessa. "Filed." Her reply was almost instantaneous. "Filed. You're protected." I took a deep breath. Then I replied to my son, my thumbs steady, drawing the new, necessary line. "Hold your end. Then we talk." Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you are listening from. So please comment below and let's share our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.